Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. Great turnout. And want to thank Andrea and Elizabeth for setting up the wonderful food we have. And I also want to welcome our delegates and our senator. On my left is Delegate Jared Solomen, Delegate Al Carr, Senator Jeff Waldstreicher, and Delegate Emily Shetty. They're going to take a few minutes, each of them, to just give a couple minutes, that's repetitive, a couple minutes to give some high priorities and some things that might be happening in the new session that they would like to share. And then Eden Durbin, who is the Chief of Staff to Delegate Solomen, will be moderating and taking questions. I also want to thank the other staffers who are here, Luke Borwigan and David Handowitz, if I have that right. So once again, thank you everybody, and I'm going to turn this over to Eden.
Let's actually let you guys start. Emily, do you want to start?
I think we usually customarily let Jeff go first.
I'm not used to it because our wonderful Senator Rich Madalena used to always go first, and I guess now that's me. So thank you, each and every one of you, and to the town of Garrett Park for having us this evening. It's wonderful to be with each and every one of you, and it's my honor and privilege to serve as your state senator. We had a similar event last night, and I started by talking with this about a once-in-a-generation school reform package that you're going to be hearing a lot about in the press and from us. It's called the Kerwin package, but I feel badly because I stole a little bit of the thunder from my colleague Jared Solomen, who sits on the committee with jurisdiction over that package. So consider this a little bit like a movie preview. We're doing something huge this year, and Delegate Solomen will tell you more about it. Much of what I do will be on my committee. Each of us serves on only one committee. We're the only state in the union that operates like that. It encourages specialization. I sit on the Judicial Proceedings Committee, what most jurisdictions would call a Judiciary Committee. You probably see Representative Raskin doing a lot of that on television. We do that on a much smaller scale in the Judicial Proceedings Committee. And that committee has jurisdiction over family law, criminal justice, and a number of other important issues, including marijuana as well. So let me tell you a little bit about what I'll be focusing on this year. We have tens of thousands of our neighbors who walk around with minor offenses on their criminal record. That prevents them from getting a job, prevents them from getting government services, and these are often small-time things that happened long ago. It's like the Scarlet Letter. It's just like the book, to be honest. And sometimes the impact can even be worse. And so I'll be working on an omnibus expungement bill that would allow our friends, neighbors, and relatives who have minor criminal offenses on their records to expunge it from their records and to get access to government services. That'll include possession of marijuana. Along those same lines, this year we will begin the 2-year process of legalizing recreational marijuana in Maryland. First, we'll take the criminal justice side, and probably next year, 2021, we'll look to legalize in a very controlled fashion recreational marijuana. Last thing, we do family law in my committee, and there are a number of ways we can improve our divorce, custody, and laws when it comes to children. That includes foster children. In Maryland, we're one of the few states where foster parents are not parties to the adoption of their foster children. They can show up in court like you and I can, but they don't have a right to speak or to talk about their interaction with their own foster children. And so we're going to give them what's called intervenor rights to make sure foster parents have a right to speak at the adoption of their foster children. So that's what I'm working on. Thank you again for having me. It's an honor and privilege to serve.
Hi, everybody. My name is Emily Shetty. I'm one of your 3 delegates. I'm in my now going on my 2nd year of the 4-year term. Thank you for the privilege of allowing us to serve as your representatives in Annapolis. I serve on the House Judiciary Committee, which is the House version of the committee that our Vice Chairman of JPR will be serving on, and it will be my 2nd year on this committee. My 1st year, I focused on issues related to child welfare in particular. So I worked on a bill that helped to raise the minimum age of detention in Maryland. So we had been detaining children as young as 7 years old in the state of Maryland. We were among the youngest. And North Carolina, the state that I grew up in, actually has it codified at 6, so they were detaining children as young as 6. And that's not something to be proud of, considering that the United Nations recommendations is that we do it at 12 as the minimum age. So we raised Maryland's minimum age to 12, which puts us at the highest for nonviolent offenses across the country and in line with United Nations recommendations. So I was really proud to pass that bill unanimously through both chambers and signed into law by the governor. This year, I'll be focusing on a couple of different areas. I've not yet finalized my full package of bills that I'm working on, but one area that I'm really interested in is robocalls and protecting seniors from financial exploitation. This comes from an area of kind of a personal story. My godmother, who lived in Bethesda for about 50 years, was the victim of a massive financial scam after her husband had suffered from a stroke. He had managed all of their assets and resources up until that point of their marriage, and then when he fell ill, she took over that responsibility for their family and then became prey to some really serious criminals from all over the world. The Attorney General's office around the same time had just been extended the authority by the General Assembly to pursue criminals across state lines who go after seniors in this way. There is literally one man in that office who handles all of the cases for all of the seniors that are impacted by this type of crime. And as you can imagine, unfortunately, he has an incredibly big job. So I'm working with the Attorney General's office on a bill that will help expedite the way in which he can file these cases so that he can serve and the office can serve more seniors and help recover more assets that are stolen from them. On the flip side, I'm also working with some robocall experts to try and limit access to all of us by these con artists who are preying upon individuals of all ages in our state. And so I'll be introducing legislation to try and address how do we reduce the number of robocalls that are happening in our state. I'm also a part of an informal group of lawmakers working on a zero waste package, so trying to address climate change by reducing the amount of waste that we're sending to our landfills. So our group of lawmakers are comprised of individuals from a lot of different counties from across the state and in Baltimore City. And each of us have different area of interest, and I'm really interested in composting as well as incentivizing businesses to adopt green solutions and looking at how we can expand our Montgomery County green energy program. So that's just a couple of the things that I'll be working on, and I'm excited to answer your questions and hear more about what you would like to see us work on. Thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Good evening. My name is Al Carr, and I am very proud to represent you in District 18 along with my teammates. Thank you for electing us, re-electing me a little over a year ago. I am a resident of Kensington, and I serve on the Health and Government Operations Committee in the House of Delegates. This is an exciting week because we are about to go into our annual legislative session that begins on Wednesday, and it lasts for 90 days. This is the period of time that we meet in the Capitol every day, and we pass a state budget, and we will consider between 2,000 and 3,000 bills to put into law. So it's a very busy time, but your timing is good because it's a great time for us to hear ideas and priorities from you. So we'll be working on a lot of big issues this year, whether it's issues to reduce gun violence or other issues. I've left you with a handout that describes some of the things that I'm personally championing this year, and I'll just highlight a couple. But one topic of interest for me is open government. This is the 50th anniversary of our Sunshine Law, the Maryland Public Information Act, which we continue to refine and improve over time. And there is a need to make some further improvements. There are a number of loopholes, perhaps, in the current law that need to be tightened up, that unscrupulous agencies might take advantage of when they want to hide information from municipalities or from individuals instead of sharing it. So we'll be working on tightening up some of those loopholes. And I'll be working on a number of bills related to transportation policies, whether it's tightening down the rules for an agency that might want to widen the Beltway with private toll lanes, or making our transportation agencies more consumer-friendly, and so that they are not taking advantage of vulnerable Marylanders through raising money through fines and fees and unfair types of policies. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks, and I'm really interested in and eager to hear what's on your mind. Thanks.
Move this over here. Good evening, everybody, and Happy New Year. My name is Garrett Solomen, like Delegate Shetty, going into my second year. Thank you for the honor of representing the community. So we got a little bit of a preview from Senator Waldstreicher. So I am really honored to be able to sit on the House Appropriations Committee. And so we have jurisdiction over the entire budget. We get to stick our nose into a little bit of everything, which is kind of fun. But most importantly this year, we really have jurisdiction over two, I think, once-in-a-generation bills, opportunities to really make groundbreaking improvements to our schools, both the programs that operate within the schools and the actual physical facilities that we house our schools and our children in as well. So one bill, and they've been bookmarked as House Bill 1 and House Bill 2, and Senate Bill 1 and Senate Bill 2, which I think just emphasizes how important these bills are to our new presiding officers and to the chamber. So the first bill, the Build to Learn Act, is one that I actually was able to work on last year, would bring potentially as much as $400 million with another match from the county, so $800 million in new school construction dollars, for things like building new buildings, for renovating aging facilities, for all sorts of backlog construction needs and facility needs that we need, not only in Montgomery County, but across the state. And that would be paid for through bonding the lockboxed casino money, exactly the purposes of why we originally had gambling. And the other bill or package of bills is built around the Kerwood Commission, as some of you may be familiar with, also called the Blueprint to Maryland's Future. And that, again, is a once every 20 years, we sort of take a holistic look at our school systems. The previous version was the Thornton Commission, which really just kind of looked at funding. Well, Kerwin is looking at funding, but also at really systematic policy changes and accountability changes as well. And again, we have the opportunity between the construction funding and the funding for the programs in the school to make sure that every student in Montgomery County, in Wycomico County, in Baltimore City, and Prince George's has the opportunity to get a world-class education no matter where they grow up. And I'm a former high school teacher. I taught in Baltimore City, so it's one of the reasons I ran, was to be able to work on this package. And so it's really exciting to see it actually now coming to fruition with the commitment from both the new incoming Senate President and the Speaker of the House to really get this across the finish line. So I'm really excited about that. I'm going to be working on a whole host of bills next year, some in the areas of pedestrian safety, a couple of issues on the environment, some things around access to college. Our committee has jurisdiction over not only the funding for education, but the higher ed system in the state as well. But there's a couple of bills, there's three bills in particular that I wanted to highlight. The first is a bill that we're doing to backfill some of the really terrible cuts that the federal government is attempting to make, that the Trump administration is attempting to make on the SNAP program. So we've done an amazing job in Maryland of providing additional assistance to people who are food insecure. And these cuts that are being proposed really as a total end around Congress would dramatically scale back the gains that we've made in fighting hunger in the state. And so in a couple of other policy areas, our state government has stepped up to sort of fill that gap. And I'm hoping that we never have to do it because there's a lot of battles going on at the federal level, but I want to make sure that in Maryland we're making that commitment that nobody in the state should be going hungry. Another bill, and I'm glad to see that you have it here, is around bathroom access. So our bill would build off of what the city of Baltimore has done, where individual stall bathrooms would be gender neutral. So it's obviously a civil rights issue for the LGBT plus community, but also for people with disabilities, people with small children. It's a real common sense fix that was pretty non-controversial in Baltimore City, and we're hoping to do the same thing statewide. And then I guess the last one are sort of two bills that go together. So I want to thank a lot of the folks in this room who were just absolutely instrumental, and Delegate Carr mentioned the work that many of us have done around fighting the Beltway and 270 widening proposal. And while the proposal that's being voted on Wednesday by the Board of Public Works may not be exactly what we wanted, we would not be in this position if it were not for the dedicated work of so many of you and colleagues and friends and neighbors across Montgomery County and really across the region. And so, while this is a step in potentially the wrong direction, it's a significantly smaller step than it would have been otherwise. And so, the bill that I introduced last year with the help of a lot of my colleagues would really put in place a great deal more oversight and accountability around the public-private partnership process that we have in the state. And really, what we're trying to do this year is bring that bill back. We made it out of the House, got a little clogged in the Senate. We're hoping for potentially some friendlier waters this year, but we want to make sure that we're writing a role for the General Assembly back into approving these types of projects, because right now it's essentially up to two votes on the Board of Public Works, which I think is a little bit crazy for a project that has such wide ramifications. But we're also looking at forward-thinking solutions. So a lot of us are part of the Transit Caucus that is newly formed this year, and so I'll have a bill to do pilot run-through service on the MARC train to Virginia. It's a small step forward with a few trains, but we're working closely with the state of Virginia and the business community to hopefully make this a reality, to show that there is a proof of concept that people will get on the train in Maryland to go to work in Virginia without getting in their cars. And so I'm really excited to provide solutions, not just, has been coined opposition to alleviating traffic. I don't think any of us are pro-traffic. I hate traffic. Anyway, so I'm really excited to get back to Annapolis on Wednesday and looking forward to taking your questions.
Good evening. I hope you can hear me. Again, I'm Eden Durbin, I'm Chief of Staff with Delegate Solomen. So there's a couple of questions. Some of them were repeats and sort of built off of one another. So I'm going to go with some of the longer ones. And if in fact there's other questions we want to ask, we can get to that at the end. Or if you think I didn't fully explain the card, you can always jump right in. So HB 4 is a bill that will close the loophole that currently allows rifles and shotguns to be purchased without a criminal background check. Delegate Shetty and Senator Waldstreicher, what are your plans to pass these bills quickly out of committee so that they can be voted on in the full House and Senate before the legislative session ends?
So I can start and to speak a little bit to the House side, and obviously I will defer to my colleague on the Senate side. So I think on the House side, we're in great shape. We have a priority and a commitment from leadership. Numbering it as the fourth is like a really big step, I think, and a great indication of the support we have from our new speaker. One thing we've neglected to speak about in our introductions, and for those who don't follow Annapolis too closely, we've had a huge amount of change since we adjourned. On our last day of session, sadly, our longtime speaker passed away. We elected a new speaker. We've had a huge number of shifts, some members leaving, some new members joining, new members of leadership, and new members on our committee as well as others. And so I think that that's going to put this bill in particular, but many other bills as well, in a really good position to pass early and in good shape. We had a great debate in our committee and good discussion, but ultimately I think where we landed on the bill was really a good place, and we were able to get a strong bill out of our chamber. Hopefully we'll be able to do that sooner, but I think with the commitment from our speaker, I think we're in a good shape. So I'll turn the floor to my Senate colleague.
Yeah, so our circumstances are similar. So House Bill 4 is, of course, a House bill. It starts on the House side, so the Senate can't act until the House does. The House will move quickly. As you heard, that's a good thing. So the bill will then come over from the House to the Senate, and will then be in possession of the bill. Like Delegate Shetty mentioned, we've had a number of vacancies in the Senate. We're down 2 members from resignations. Both of their replacements will be assigned to our committee, the Judicial Proceedings Committee. It takes 6 votes to get anything out of my committee. Right now, we only have 5 Democrats. And because this is a gun measure, and gun issues are generally polarized by party, we don't have the 6 Democrats. So we'll have to wait until Democrat is appointed to fill that seat. That should happen relatively quickly, obviously. When we get to 6, we should be able to move the bill out of committee with haste, bring it to the floor, and then see where we go from there. As you know, the governor has oftentimes expressed relatively moderate views on some things, or perceived as being moderate on some things. On gun issues, he generally aligns with his party, and so that means we'll not only need the 24 votes in the Senate that it would take to pass a bill, but the 29 votes that it would take to override Governor Hogan's veto. I'm going to work under the assumption that he's going to veto the bill, although he hasn't explicitly said so. Getting to 29 means getting other Democrats, some of whom represent purple areas or rural areas where they have different views about guns than I do and that you may do. So there are challenges ahead, but they're not insurmountable, and I'm excited to work with each and every one of you, with Moms Demand Action, with Marylanders to Prevent Gun Violence, and other wonderful organizations to pass this important bill.
A number of bills have been introduced in the Maryland legislature recently preempting local regulation of telecom antennas to facilitate placing so-called small cell antennas in residential neighborhoods. My question is, if these transmitters turn out to be safe and useful, do we really need state preemption to get local communities to treat them favorably? And if it turns out, as many claim, that there are transmitters are not safe for human health, won't it be glad that local communities are trying to protect their residents? In other words, isn't preemption really just a way for industry to force antennas close to homes on local communities, even if they turn out not to be safe? And if that's so, can we count on you to oppose efforts to prevent communities from protecting themselves and their residents?
So I will just say I think we're blessed, as I think we have the highest number of municipalities of any district in the state of Maryland. We have 9, including where we are today, Garrett Park, and so we know our communities very zealously, as well as the county, like to keep local control as much as possible. And I will speak just for myself. I don't want to put words in the mouths of my colleagues, but I think that local control is incredibly important to the character and the feel of our community. And so bills that do away with that and preempt the authority of local jurisdictions are not something that I'm in favor of.
Ditto.
Yep, same here.
Okay. We may have addressed this, but does the delegation have a position on widening of 495? If so, would you please articulate that position? So you've mentioned a couple of bills. Anything else that you want to contribute to the conversation?
I would just say keep the pressure on, particularly the county. I think in the General Assembly, we're generally in the right place. It's about making sure that I think we restore a place for the General Assembly to make decisions in these processes. But we need to make sure that the county continues to hold MDOT and the State Highway Administration accountable. I am cautiously optimistic with the new incoming Secretary of Transportation, Pete Ron, who will likely get approved by the Senate next week or the week after. Slater, thank you. Yep. Old Secretary, Freudian slip there. Greg Slater has been much more, he is a career engineer at SHA. He's worked for the State Highway Administration for his whole career. He's previously the administrator, and has just been incredibly collaborative to work with, and I think is really making a commitment to working with the county to solving the issues in a way that everybody can live with. But I think you all just need to keep that pressure up on the county council to make sure that they're holding up their end of the bargain too.
I would like to register my strong skepticism and opposition to the school boundary analysis as it is currently taking shape. I believe the emphasis should be on excellent schools for all. Kids should be in neighborhood schools unless there is a reason for them personally to be in different school. Neighborhood schools make sense for community cohesion, potential for parental involvement, less stress on kids and the environment. I believe that the Supreme Court will strike down the especially diversity factor and hope we do not waste taxpayer and money waiting for that decision. Instead, focus on schools that are excellent for all. Do you have an opinion on this?
So I guess I'll start. I'm a parent of 3 school-age kids. Public schooling is extremely important to me, as it is to all of you, I'm sure, too. But the issue of policies for setting school boundaries, drawing of school boundaries, that is a matter that falls under the purview of the school board. And you all elect the school board. You can reach out to them, participate in their meetings or public forums. I know there's a meeting tomorrow evening on this very topic that's at Walter Johnson High School, and there is an election coming up in 2020. The school board members are staggered, so half the school board is elected in the presidential year, and the other half is elected in the midterms. So you have an opportunity to ask these questions of candidates, school board candidates, and participate in the democratic process that way. But as state legislators, we don't have the power to really influence much about school boundaries. There is one bill we have, local bill, that talks about real estate agents and what they communicate during the sales process and how that might work. But otherwise, we don't really have a say on boundary issues.
The only thing I would add to what Delegate Carr mentioned was one of the bills that I'm working on with Senator Kramer is to create an inspector general position for MCPS. So the county has essentially that on the books already, but in order to actually create the office, they need to get authorization from the state. So last session, we gave authorization, I think, for Montgomery College, for Housing Partnership, and the WSSC, is that the other one? HOC, thank you. And so this year, Senator Kramer and I are working on essentially giving them the authority to set up an office specifically for MCPS. And unrelated to the boundary study, I think any agency with a budget of $3 billion should have, independent oversight, but it'll also give the public an opportunity to, to make sure they can weigh in. It'll honestly, I think, make the school board more effective. The school board is technically a part-time position. We pay school board members $25,000 a year to manage a multi-billion-dollar agency with 200 plus schools and 150,000 or 165,000 plus kids. So giving the school board more of an opportunity to rely on outside independent analysis as opposed to just relying on what they're getting from MCPS, I think will make the whole system work better.
Why hasn't the state implemented the recommendations of the Maryland State Children's Environmental Health and Protection Advisory Council to provide wired internet to schools instead of wireless due to well-documented health effects on children of wireless?
Not an issue I'm familiar with, but happy to look into it. Yeah, had never heard of the issue.
If the person who posed the question wants to follow up with us.
Or if you leave your contact info, we can get an answer to you.
From Glenda Ingham, who couldn't be here tonight, County's Liquor Control Board, will county relinquish control?
So I used to sit on the committee with jurisdiction over the issue of alcohol and state and county regulation of alcohol. So as you know, Montgomery County has strict regulation of its alcohol laws and a monopoly over the distribution of alcohol in the county. To change that law will require state action, meaning us up here. But generally, we wait for the county to act on that. In other words, if the county would want to abolish that monopoly, they would ask us to do so, and they have a vote to do so. The county has not been able to reach consensus, or to be honest, even majority, on abolishing the liquor monopoly. And so without them asking us to do so, I think there is a hesitancy of this for the state to do it on its own. We're waiting for guidance, if not a consensus, then at least a majority on liquor laws in Montgomery County. We haven't had that. In the previous term, we went kind of through that drama to see whether there was a desire to move forward without the county, and it just completely cleaved the jurisdiction in a way that I think was not particularly productive. And so I think there's a stronger emphasis now. If the county comes to us with a particular recommendation, that's a recommendation we are likely to follow.
I will add, separate from the county's liquor laws, I think there's been a very big shift in the assembly. Obviously, Delegate Shetty and I are relatively new, but last session we were able to pass legislation as a chamber around loosening the restrictions for the craft brew industry. So it's a burgeoning industry, not only around the state, but particularly even in District 18. And so I think the moves to allow more sort of craft, artisanal brews and wineries to sprout up and really flourish, to be able to boost our economy. I think you'll continue to see the assembly work on those kind of things.
Pedestrian safety, especially along major roads in Montgomery County. What's being done?
So this is a question we get from all parts of our district. As you can imagine, we have significant challenges, particularly among the arterial roads, which happen to be state roads. So our delegation works really closely together as a team on many issues, but this one in particular. We have been coordinating with the State Highway Administration as well as with the MCDOT and law enforcement as well on this issue in multiple parts of our community. We've done walkthroughs with the State Highway Administration showing them challenges that pedestrians and motorists and public transit are seeing. We've had community forums having State Highway, MCDOT, law enforcement come out and hear directly from the community. We had a really big forum actually on Connecticut Avenue after the accidents happened at the intersection of Saul Road in Connecticut, one that impacted a resident of the town of Chevy Chase View, who is a doctor over here at Walter Reed. And we've seen actually some significant response from SHA and MCDOT. They're making some minor and major improvements along many of the arterial roads countywide, but a lot of it has been, as residents have shared individual issues that they're seeing on the ground. I mean, obviously we all live in different parts of the community as well, and we travel through the community and we see things, but nobody knows your community better than you. So we rely on you to tell us about issues so that we can take them to SHA and MCDOT and get the timing of lights changed or additional crosswalks added, higher visibility crosswalks added. We just heard from SHA that they're exploring the option of entirely redesigning an intersection, and we're excited about that because it's an intersection that has had numerous accidents recently. So we're working closely with all of those and rely heavily on you for your input and additional feedback.
Budget concerns at the state and county for 2021. How is the state dealing with revenue decreases, state economy, and unemployment rates, highway user funds to municipalities? So that's sort of, there's multi-level. Revenue decreases, state economy and unemployment rates, and highway user funds.
So I guess I'll start by saying at the state level, of course, we're required to balance our budget every year. That's in our Constitution, so that's what we do. And the short-term picture at the state level is healthy. So we're not experiencing a revenue decrease at the state level. Things are stable, actually, a little bit higher than expected, which is good. There is something called the Wynn case, which was a Supreme Court case that had to do with residents of Maryland who were working out of state and being taxed as if they were working in state. So there is a liability there, and it primarily affects the county. So that is something that Montgomery County is affected by, that they'll have to eventually pay back. It's been deferred for a while. So we're very aware of that and seeking solutions that would possibly give the county some relief. And then on the highway user revenue issue, highway user revenues are state money. It comes from vehicle registrations, other transportation revenue, and the state provides this to local governments, counties and municipalities, to maintain the local road network. And I was in office along with Senator Waldstreicher in 2008. in 2009, which is, unfortunately the worst economy in my lifetime, when state revenues greatly decreased, and we had to make some really unpleasant decisions. And one of those decisions was to divert highway user revenues, money from the state, away from municipalities. So we took some steps to restore a lot of that money, and I know there's a desire, especially on the municipalities, to restore that all the way. So we are definitely keeping that in mind as we move forward and look at our budget.
One thing I will add is I think we've, particularly this session, really looking at making investments in areas that could help continue to grow our economy. And so the one area that I'll mention, particularly in Montgomery County, that is going to be a priority for me and some of my county colleagues on the Appropriations Committee, is really making sure that we're fully funding the universities of Shady Grove. So those of you that may have been following, they just opened a beautiful new biomedical building, science facility that I think would rival the best buildings in any campus around the world. And we've got to make sure that we're funding the programs for our higher ed system across the state to actually fill that building. Things for translational sciences, things for dental clinics, to groundbreaking genetic research, things that are all being done just up 270. And that can really spur an incredible growth of our economy in Montgomery County. And so there was a committee that met this year over the interim to sort of look at what's the future of the universities of Shady Grove, what are the partnerships that we should be building with our federal labs that are in the area, the incredible federal resources and science resources that we already have here. And there's an incredible opportunity. So again, we have to make sure our role this year is making sure that USG is fully funded, that we are bringing the kind of educational resources and job training programs to Montgomery County to continue to be able to flourish, to take advantage of Amazon's move to Northern Virginia and the proximity that we're going to have for the tech sector and the bio sector as well. So I think that the best way to continue to increase revenue and be able to provide the services that we've all become accustomed to is to continue to grow the economy. And I think really investing in USG and our educational resources will help with that.
Any more thought on a bypass road from Strathmore Road to Garrett Park Elementary School, which would relieve traffic, school buses, parents, children who live outside of Garrett Park, contributing to overcongestion of vehicles on Kenilworth? Bypass road would relieve congestion and lead to more safety.
Well, I'll take this one because but it's not an idea that I think has been widely discussed, but perhaps needs to be part of the conversation. In the meantime, I know the four of us are fighting to extend the sidewalk here in Garrett Park all the way to 355. We wish we could have made that part of the stormwater project, but it looks like this will be a phased approach. And so I know that in my neighborhood, which is the Parkwood and Kensington Estates neighborhood, there's always discussion about better pedestrian access, essentially a bypass through the neighborhood to the metro. But the best thing we can do in the short term is to build that sidewalk. And as we've all heard at various forums, when you build a sidewalk, you can do it or you can do it right. And doing it right means making sure it's wide enough, not just for ADA compliance, but so that people feel comfortable on it, feel like they're walking along a neighborhood street, not right up against the sidewalk, the road. And so that means putting a grass buffer in between as well. So I think that's what we'll be fighting for, but whoever mentioned the idea of this bypass, whether it's road or pedestrian, I'd love to hear more about it.
How will PG MC 101-20, which is mandatory reviews, impact Beltway expansion?
Okay, well, that's my bill, so I'll take that question. So, so obviously. This is a bill that I've introduced for the second year in a row, and it has to do with something called mandatory referrals. So we have an agency called Park and Planning, which is in charge of all the land use as well as parks in Montgomery and Prince George's County. And so they have the authority not just over zoning issues, which affects private property, but when governmental entities build something, they're required to go through something called the mandatory review. They have to get their project reviewed and approved by Park and Planning, and it has a component of public input. There's a public hearing involved too, and it's advisory. So Park and Planning doesn't have the final say on it, but they do have the chance to review it and let the public review it too. So the way the current law is written, an agency is required to submit their application, and if the agency and Park and Planning don't agree that it was a complete submittal, then the agency can just wait 90 days and it's deemed submitted. So they have a very easy way to bypass the review process. And we've seen that because, I don't know if you've observed coming off the Beltway at Connecticut Avenue, you can see something being built there on the side. That is the salt barn, the new salt barn that the State Highway Administration is relocating from West Howard Avenue over to close to Beltway. That's exactly what happened, where they were able to avoid scrutiny by doing this. So this is just aimed at closing a loophole, and you can imagine with projects like 270 in the Beltway, if they're avoiding scrutiny on small projects, they're certainly going to do that on big projects too. So there's just another way to get the State Highway Administration to follow the rules and have their project be appropriately reviewed and scrutinized.
At this point, I've gone through all the cards that were passed up to me. Are there any other cards, or is there anybody else who would like to ask a question? Yes, ma'am.
I'm very interested in this.
We actually have to use the microphone
I'm
so
sorry.
that those watching
Okay,
can.
I'm sorry. I was very interested, Ms. Shetty, on your discussion about composting and expanding that concept and the ability for municipalities to potentially access that.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about private, which I have issues with?
Yeah, so there are a couple of ideas that we're working on as part of this work group. So we're planning, as I mentioned, there are a number of delegates from across the state that are working on a package of legislation on zero waste. So each of us have different pieces of it. My piece is giving an individual or family tax credit to allow you to either purchase compost products so that you can compost at home, or to contract that service out. As you know, there are a number of agencies that not agencies, but companies you can hire to come pick up your compost and take it to a nearby compost site. We kind of taking off my delegate hat and putting on my good neighbor hat. I live over in Rock Creek Hills by the Mormon Temple, and I worked with one of my neighbors who's also interested in composting on trying to get our neighborhood up and running with a neighborhood compost program, and we were able to get in our little neighborhood 57 homes signed up to compost, and that just adds to the number of individuals who are already doing it in their backyard. Just by virtue of, we worked with a company to get essentially a discounted rate, and they work with different neighborhood associations, municipalities, or individual communities, residents, whatever. If you're able to get a certain number of people to sign up, they'll give a discount. So that kind of gave me the idea of if we're able to give a financial incentive to individuals to have access to these services, then perhaps we can incentivize more adoption of
But
that.
there's no look at potentially helping to build facilities so
So-
that within Montgomery County,
Yeah.
every resident would be able to have access
Actually,
to that, as
yeah.
opposed to a private company making a profit on it, which is what I object to.
Yeah, I hear that. So,
I'm
so
sorry,
we've been
they're
working.
They're making a big profit on it. and-
Right. So we've been working with the DEP director, Adam Ortiz, here in Montgomery County, who actually comes from Prince George's County, and he started the largest composting facility on the East Coast using an EPA grant under the Obama administration. As you can imagine, under the current administration, those funds don't exist anymore. However, one of the bills in the zero waste compost package would provide resources to counties who wish to expand and create facilities to do so. So that, Prince George's County is one, but if we are able to develop one in Montgomery County, then we would have the resources provided at the state level. So as I mentioned, I have two pieces of this broader package. There are additional pieces to the package, including what can we do to support counties. And some counties won't be able to create their own sites. You need space, a lot of space to do it, and a lot of additional planning. We're fortunate to have the expertise of Adam Ortiz because he's already done this. He knows what needs to be done, and is able to potentially get something up and running. And I know that Montgomery County is looking at two options. I think the county is looking at either what they can do in the short term to potentially build a site, and they're scouting out locations in the county, but they're also looking at, what can they do as a cooperative agreement with Prince George's County to expand access to services countywide to residents, because there is significant interest. And a number of municipalities, including in District 18, have contracted with companies to pick up composting, and they're offering it to their residents either at a discount or as part of the town dues. So. Right. Our garbage is the same way, right? Like we have our landfill operator that is for profit. We have and that is significantly higher profit than the compost. We also have the companies that pick up the garbage are private entities. Some of them are union, some of them are not. But they're not Montgomery County government employees. We contract those services out, and as we would if we adopted a system countywide,
But it's
most
also
likely.
being transported at this point to Michigan.
That's correct. And Prince George's County is benefiting significantly from it. Not only are they benefiting from diverting their own resources away from landfill, right? Because the cost of processing landfill waste is significantly higher than the cost of processing recycling, and much higher than the cost of compost. In fact, you actually generate a revenue from compost, both from the tipping fee as well as then the site actually sells back the compost to the private companies who are picking it up, as well as to Home Depot and other landscaping companies. So it is a significant economic benefit to their county. I want to make sure that our county is hopefully be able to do the same.
Thank you.
I was going to say, and I have another bill similar to what Delegate Shetty was saying. There's a number of us working on this issue. So there's a program called Sustainable Maryland that actually Garrett Park has been a part of, and I believe North Dakota Chase, I think, has just had their green team meeting. So Sustainable Maryland is through the extension program at the University of Maryland, and it's essentially been funded through EPA grants and private foundations. And to Delegate Shetty's point, the federal money is drying up. And the lack of resources means that Sustainable Maryland has not been able to really expand their work. They've worked with about 60 municipalities across the state to do things like composting, creating even walkable communities, a whole host of sort of green teams and green plans that communities and local municipalities can use. And so what we're going to be doing is trying to get a dedicated source of funding for them so that they continue their work, they know it's reliable, hopefully they can eventually expand their work more with homeowners associations and community associations. They did the stormwater management plan for Wheaton Hills just up the road, which was really wonderful. So we're hoping to be able to get some dedicated funding for them to be able to continue their work.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate Delegate Solomon's efforts with respect to the IG, as indicated by my little clapping over here. And thank you for finding a way to be involved with Montgomery County Public Schools, even at the state level. And I think there are ways to be involved, even if not just officially, but we know that folks at different levels of the government interact at parties and around town, and there are different ways to express things to our colleagues who we might agree with on a lot of things, but there are reasons to be skeptical about this boundary analysis process. A lot has been done behind closed doors. The communication has been very, very poor. A lot of you folks are expressing interest in environmental issues, expressing interest in the traffic and how many fatalities we've had. It's just crazy to think of the number of fatalities. One thing that hasn't been mentioned are, if you follow WTOP, you often see kind of sex offenses by people who are part of school systems, like aides on buses, that kind of thing. So there are a lot of different issues that come into play when we're thinking about making kids have longer commutes to their schools. I personally believe that neighborhood schools are best, and that there are ways to find yourself in the neighborhoods for the school you'd like to attend. My own background is coming from a very working class, poor, single family experience, and my mom specifically moved to downtown Bethesda so that I could go to great schools. There are a lot of kids like that whose parents decided to move to an area to give their child the best opportunity possible. I think putting them on a bus to send them to another area because the county has decided that they are part of the group that should be bused to another area is a terrible idea. I think instead the focus should be on the excellence of every schools. We shouldn't be trying to bring up the average just enough so that it kind of looks pretty good for the county. Instead, we should be demanding that the children at lower performing schools don't go to lower performing schools. Those schools should be higher performing, and every effort should be made in that regard. If you look at the statistics of the tenure of the teachers at the school, the lower performing schools have teachers who have been there many fewer years. Teachers at the higher performing schools have been there for much longer, are compensated more. So are there ideas about, sending the higher performing teachers or teachers who've been very well regarded in the community, giving them compensation packages to send them to lower performing schools to help those schools become higher performing schools? I just think I would really encourage you to use your position amongst your colleagues to frame the debate in a constructive way on this. I've been very discouraged that the debate has been framed and anyone who's skeptical about the boundary analysis is racist. I think that's counterproductive, it's untrue, and I really encourage you to use your position to make it the much more complicated issue that it is. Mental health issues are implicated with kids on so many anxiety, depression issues, like putting them on an hour-long bus commute. None of them makes sense. So please complicate this issue for your colleagues. It's not just about not wanting to go to certain schools. It's a very complicated issue, and I encourage you to engage in it as much as you can.
Thank you.
Well, I think you've raised a lot of really good points. And again, I started my career as a teacher, so a lot of the issues that you mentioned, and I've worked in education policy for a long time, are issues that are not necessarily easy to solve. One of the really, I think, positive pieces of the Kerwin package, of the blueprint package that we're going to be working on this year, is it really addresses teacher preparation. We want to make sure that we have high quality teachers everywhere, and frankly, I think our preparation system in the state could use a nice freshening up. And one of the incentives that's going into the Kerwin package is going to be measurements on not just overall achievement, but looking at specific achievement within all groups that you're teaching in the school, so that you can't just sort of say, well, everybody's doing really well, but we're not going to go into the sort of those subgroups and look at, people who are on free and reduced meals, who, it's usually an indicator of poverty, or different ethnicities. And I think MCPS is doing a really good job of starting to dig that data out, I think, in a way that frankly no other school system really in the state is doing, where they're breaking out subgroups and they're really, the level of transparency of sort of the test results and the achievement scores has been, I think, really groundbreaking. But, to your point, I think our priority is to make sure that we have high quality schools everywhere, and making sure that the process, I think the process is just starting. And I think, to your point, I think cooler heads across the board are probably needed. There's some of the media reports, there's been a lot of vitriol from both sides, and I will just say that I think they are very early in the process. Just from what we've been monitoring, and I think, as Delegate Carr said earlier, urge you to continue to share those concerns. I hope that cooler heads prevail, because a lot of the concerns that are raised on both sides are very valid. But it seems to me like the school system is at the very beginning of what will be a very long process. When I used to work for DC Public Schools, and DCPS underwent a boundary study on a much smaller scale. When I was there, I wasn't directly involved in it, but just working in central office, you're sort of part of it. And so I know these things go on for a long time. They're incredibly important and weighty subjects. And I think our colleagues at the council and the school board really understand that. And I think, again, just would encourage you to continue to engage and be a reasonable voice at the table.
I'm going to do this side because I've done this side.
Hi. I'm concerned about the lack of oversight over the placement of cell antennas and towers and poles in our residential areas in Montgomery County where people live. In the great race to be first in 5G placement and compared to other counties and other countries, we already have people in Montgomery County who are being left, not only left behind by this grand race, but run over by having, for example, in Tacoma Park, in an apartment building, 33 cell antennas at the top of an apartment building, measurements of 25 times the FCC limit for at a certain type of maximum exposure to radio frequency RF radiation. That's already at the top of an apartment building in Tacoma Park. And we have at 78, at one of the house on Brickyard Lane in Potomac, a woman who had a cell tower incorrectly placed there and 40 feet from her front door 8 years ago. Everyone's known about these cases. We bring it up at the Montgomery County Council, which we like to think is representing us, but like the FCC, which is a captured agency, we increasingly think that Montgomery County Council is a captured council. They're not representing sufficiently residents' concerns, because when we bring up these egregious oversights where people have had incorrect placements of cell towers, where health standards seem to be violated in a building that's affordable housing. So it seems like we're making housing affordable in Montgomery County by making it unsafe with the cell antennas. I even know of one instance where someone who owns a building, a residential building in our dear county, has said he makes more money from the antennas and the rental of those antennas at the top than he ever did from all the rents. So what I wonder about is who is watching out? Where is the oversight? Because it seems like Montgomery County Council, despite testimony about the concerns about rolling out even more all these cell towers and antennas close to residences within 30 to 60 feet of their homes, who's going to provide that oversight? If they're not doing it, where will it happen?
About this issue, to answer that.
Yeah, I'm not particularly familiar with this issue, but I'd be happy to learn more and feel free to approach us afterwards with additional information.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. My question is sort of tacking on the other lady who was talking about MCPS, which is when my kids were in a school that was largely high poverty, I noticed that the differences start the day they start kindergarten. My kid showed up being able to read because he'd been at pre-K for a couple years, but other kids came in, they didn't know their letters. Their parents are dealing with a lot and trying their hardest, but they just didn't have the same advantages that my kid had. So my question is, does Kerwin include money for things like universal pre-K or things like that? Because I know there's been studies to try to expand it like 50 seats at a time, but that's not going to get the job done.
Yeah, so actually, I think that's one of the most exciting pieces of Kerwin as well, that hopefully by the end of the 8 or 10 year window, you would have essentially near universal pre-K for people at 300% of the poverty level, and then a sliding scale for people up to 600% of poverty. And then what also I think is really great about this, and my wife was instrumental in rolling out essentially universal preschool and pre-K for the District of Columbia. You would create new seats that wouldn't just necessarily be available only for low-income families. You'd also be creating seats that would be available for anybody. They would just have to pay essentially whatever the cost was. But I will say at DC Public Schools, and we charge out-of-state tuition. So if you lived in Maryland and you worked in DC, you could essentially pay to have your child go to a school there. It was like $12,000 or $13,000, and that was a couple of years ago. But I think that is very affordable. Exactly, for those of us that are either paying for childcare or soon will be paying for childcare. That is at a significant discount, and we're talking about a high-quality program for 180 days a year, potentially with before and after care. The Kerwin legislation also begins to go even deeper into 3-year-olds and looking at preschool for particularly low-income families, but it's a priority of Kerwin, and I think writ large, we need to do a better job at expanding access to childcare. particularly for infants and toddlers, which is astronomically expensive. So hopefully this is a start of a much larger investment that we'll be making in early learning.
Yes, sir.
Hello, sorry, I'm Brian. Back here. Anyhow, I wanted to just tap on something about the county schools and with regard to the Corwin package. My wife works at Garrett Park Elementary. A number of people know this. And one of the things that she runs into on a constant basis is children who need special attention, usually one-on-one attention, which is fine because they're allowed to go to their local school, not a problem. But the thing is that there's insufficient staff to properly handle these children. And as a result, sometimes it disrupts the entire classroom and you'll end up with 3 or 4 staff people running around behind one child. And so I see 2 things. One is it possible to look at the policies that schools have with regard to disruptive children? Because it seems to be that they almost get rewarded if you actually look at it deep enough. And the second thing is, will there be money to have additional staff so these children can get the education they need by having the one-on-one time? Because for the most part, they just need to have somebody with them to help them along. And then if you do that, they seem to calm down and off you go.
Yeah, so there's actually going to be a significant amount of new funding in special education resources, and particularly a lot of funding targeted earlier. So those interventions can be done earlier so that, if you work with a student that has special needs earlier on, you can often mitigate a lot of those issues, which hopefully will produce savings on the back end. And the one thing I want to say about Kerwin that I didn't get a chance to mention earlier, so there's been a lot of talk about how expensive Kerwin's going to be and what's it going to do to the state budget, what's it going to do to the county budget. There was one chart that I looked at in specific, printed out before I came over here. What's great about the position that we're in as a county, and it's a benefit of the significant investments that we make in public education. So there's a provision called maintenance of effort, which is a requirement that essentially the school district cannot spend unless there's calamitous budget situation. You can't spend less than you spent the year before. You have to increase at least. You have to spend at least that amount. And so because Montgomery County has invested significantly in schools in a way, frankly, more so than almost any other county in the state, we essentially cover our share, the county share of the Kerwin investments for the next 7 years. So we're actually, the county is, assuming we just follow that trajectory of maintenance of effort, because we already invest in our schools so heavily, we as a county do not have to bring any new money to the table until fiscal year 2028, which means essentially for the next 7 years or so, I don't want to say we're getting free money, but we are getting a significant new infusion of resources that will not supplant, it will supplement what we're doing already. So it will hopefully address a lot of those issues. The other thing that I am super excited about Kerwin, I was with Dr. Kerwin earlier this weekend on a panel, and he was sharing that actually teachers in the United States and in Maryland plan almost have half as much planning time as teachers in other, and actually I think our teacher union folks were talking about this as well, half as much planning time as other school systems in really high functioning countries and in other really high functioning systems. And so in order to give teachers the ability to have more time to plan, to deal with problematic students and issues that are coming up in the classroom, you have to hire more staff, because if you still have the same number of students, somebody's got to be teaching those children while another adult is sitting and thinking through issues and collaborating with their colleagues. And so Kerwin will enable school districts to be able to hire a huge new amount of teachers to be able to provide planning time, to provide time to think and really work through these kind of weighty issues. It's not going to happen overnight, but again, if the Kerwin recommendations are implemented with fidelity, I think in 8 or 10 years we'll be having a much different conversation.
Yes.
I had a question for Senator Waldstreicher. I'm curious to know what you consider to be the public policy benefits of legalizing recreational marijuana, and what provisions will be put in place to mitigate the potential negative.
Sure, good question. So I came late and slowly to this issue. Part of it is just being a dad, right? This is not something I want my kids to experiment with, and it's not something I want around in my community or easy to access. But nonetheless, I saw in other communities the tremendous toll that our criminal justice system has taken on a whole generation of young men. and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about expungement of criminal records. There are tens of thousands of people right here in this state who use marijuana and have a conviction on their record for doing something that you and I might do in the privacy of our own home or do publicly with alcohol, which it can be difficult to distinguish in terms of philosophically, well, why do you criminalize one substance and not the other? And so to me, the toll that this has taken on young men throughout our state and the economic productivity that has robbed our state of from people who can no longer work or live in the mainstream economy because of that conviction. That's really what brought me to this issue. Later, as I thought about it more philosophically, I became more libertarian about it. So separate from just criminal justice issues and the cost in our society and the cost to jail people for this stuff, was just the question, well, why? Why does the state have a place in saying that you can use this substance, you can't use this substance, you can do this, you can't do that, and the distinctions being fairly illogical. And so we need to, just going back to my dad hat, we need to make sure children don't have access. We need to make sure this isn't being sold in every corner store. But for those who want it and can use it responsibly, I think they should have access to it. And then the state also has the opportunity to tax it, as we do liquor, and use that revenue to promote the values that we've been talking about tonight in education and the like. So it's not one thing, it's a combination of those things, but I think the leading factors are criminal justice, liberty, and revenue.
Thank you for all your support of Maryland schools and teachers. I've recently become aware that a disproportionate number of Title I schools have cell towers sited on their grounds, despite thousands of studies, including a 2018 NIH National Toxicology Programs indicating the adverse health effects of radiofrequency microwave radiation on human health, including the development of brain tumors and heart schwannomas. Children being the most vulnerable, as pointed out in 2012 in a letter from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And I've also recently learned that those towers are sited on those Title I schools because deals are made between the wireless industries and those Title I principals to raise money for their Title I schools. Will your plan to install an Office of Inspector General address that situation of inequity?
So I was not really aware of that specific issue, and I think we spoke briefly on Friday night at the town hall with the teachers union. I'm certainly interested in learning more about that. So our bill would not specifically direct the Inspector General to do one thing or another. It would create an opportunity, I think, for the public to be able to ask for investigations, again, to allow the county, the council to look more thoroughly, the school board to look more thoroughly. So I would highly encourage you to, as soon as that office is set up and established, and we're going to have to make sure, obviously, that the county funds it. That'll be the council's prerogative. We think they will. But I would encourage you to weigh in on that, and certainly we should talk more about the other point you raised.
I'm a dad who had a child in the county with special needs, and eventually, after working her education needs from all the angles we could, one of the professionals taking care of her situation said, "Our daughter is in a wait to fail system." And at that point, we exited public school and anteed up $45,000 a year to make up the difference. I wonder if it would be an issue of fairness to offer some sort of tax rebate to the parents that have lost the battle to get a functional IEP program for their kid in the classroom. Thank you.
Well, I'll take it first, only because my family went through the same thing. So my sister has a disability and went through the exact same circumstances as your child. and my parents could not get approval from MCPS when she couldn't be educated within the system, and just decided to throw their hands up and reach into their wallets. They're modest folks. There are not a lot of resources, but they were willing to put the resources into the education of my daughter because the school system was failing her. Not everyone has even those modest resources. And so I appreciate what you're saying in terms of a tax break, but I think the problem is deeper and more systemic than that. I don't think anyone should have to go through what you went through or what my parents went through, and that parents of children with disabilities should more easily be able to access the resources they need, including the constitutional right to the education of their children. And if the public school can't do it and a private school can, then public taxpayer dollars should be used for those circumstances, as does happen from time to time. It's just too difficult to access. So yeah, hopefully, so it's a good idea and a positive one. But I think we need to look at deeper and more systemic reform. One thing that those of you who are parents who have gone through this, and I saw as a sibling, is parents often know what's best for their children because they live with their children, because they're parents. And that sounds so obvious to say out loud, but sometimes our school system believes that they know what's best for the children and that parents are somehow too emotional or too invested to make a rational decision about their own children. I don't think that's the case, and I think we need to listen to our parents, value what they say, and respect their decisions when it comes to the placement of their children.
And just to add to that, so one of the policy discussion, and I'm speaking from personal experience too, having one of my kids with a disability, an IEP. So one of the discussions that we've had off and on over the years is it's the idea called the burden of proof. It's when parents and a school system don't agree on the placement of your child in the appropriate environment. It works differently depending on which state you live in. So there are some states that have passed laws that place the burden of proof on the school system. Instead of the burden in Maryland, the burden of proof is on the parents, and some have argued that it is more appropriate to put the burden on the school system. The school system is the entity that has all the data on the child, all the resources, and if it's going to go into a dispute, go to court, then it's going to be very, very difficult for the parents to prevail at that, to the detriment of the child. So that is legislation that could come back. That's legislation I had supported in the past, and would certainly support in the future would be to make Maryland more like some of these other states, to put the burden of proof on the school system on these kind of disputes.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thanks. So my other question regards the legalization of marijuana. And I'm just wondering, how does this square with cigarettes? Because we know that in both cases you get pollutants and so forth into your lungs. And so there's been great efforts made over decades to try and eradicate or at least reduce cigarettes, try and manage the content of cigarettes such that they're less harmful, if you will. But now we're looking at marijuana, which basically could do some of the same damage, and I don't quite understand how one would square this, being that in both cases people are being harmed by these things. So how do you see that?
I mean, I don't know enough data on like the health impact.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that the regulation along what you're talking about in the way we approach tobacco is exactly how we would approach marijuana should we decide to legalize it. And so you wouldn't be able to use it unless you were 21. And the same type of regulation that you see around medical marijuana, which is a heavy licensing requirement. Everyone gets ID'd at the door. I don't know if anyone has tried to access medical marijuana. We have 2 dispensaries in our legislative district, one in Rockville, one in Bethesda. But these are tightly regulated with actors that want to be in compliance because they have the profit motive to stay in compliance. So if they sell to someone underage, their license will be revoked very quickly, and their whole dispensary will be ended. And so, so I don't think the legalization of marijuana is the government saying this is something we approve of or promote. What I do think it's saying is you now have legal access as an adult to make decisions about your life and your health, and we're no longer going to throw people in jail for it. But it's still going to have that same level of regulation that medical marijuana does currently, and that tobacco has moved towards as well.
I think you could also argue that by legalizing it, you have greater control over what is actually circulating versus what's currently in the black market now. Could be laced with products and a lot more dangerous to the public or to those who are consuming it. So, so I think in addition to the heavy regulation around it, ensuring that there's like higher quality control measures around it could help enhance the safety.
Anybody else? Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate that you coming out. And if there's any other questions, the delegate senator I know will hang around for a while, and we'll be open to any other questions. And thank you again. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.